Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. So what we're looking at today is basically covering the assignment discussion session that we have, for the unit that we have completed, which is resource management. Now, what we're going to do is obviously I'm going to show you a couple of things first before we start. And then what I'm going to do is obviously look at switching you over to a presentation because I have converted, the assignment brief into, the PowerPoint presentation to make it easier for us to discuss in terms of, what is required for the assignment and how do we go ahead in terms of creating the evidence required for writing the assignment for this particular unit. So this particular unit, we covered, just a quick recap, we covered 4 learning outcomes. We understood what is resource management. We looked at understanding what are the different types of resources required to run businesses, organizations. And then in the end, what we also did was we filtered down to the aspect of understanding what are physical resources. Underneath that, we filtered further down to understand what are human resources. How do we manage, motivate, monitor, and when I say manage, look at performance management of the human resources, manage them, motivate them, look at rewards and incentive mechanisms. And then towards the end, we also discussed why physical resources are important for any organization from a point of view of productivity and boosting efficiency within the organization. And then we also looked at some examples during the course of our discussion, which is with different organizations to understand the need for resources, need for human resources, how human resources in particular, help get things done within the organization. When I look at from a point of view of, essentially work which is required to be done. And then last but not the least, we took up some examples primarily to, discuss in terms of some of the, performance management techniques, things like management by objective, 360-degree appraisal. We looked at, some handouts which I've provided through Moodle, which is things like balance scorecard. And those were important for us to understand because they are tools and techniques that HR managers or, managers within organizations essentially use when we talk about appraisal or when we talk about, performances which are basically reviewed at the end of the year. So we talked about certain performance management techniques, and these are at this stage for you to understand and have a, let's say a macro overview of what these techniques are and how they are used by HR in particular to, get things done or get things moving from a point of view of productivity and efficiency. Last assessment criteria typically talked about making recommendations in terms of how, efficiency and productivity within the organization can be improved. And we looked at some broad parameters of technology. We looked at things like training. We looked at, organizations having what are called training portals, and in general, better communication in order to ensure that, the understanding which is required from a point of view of mission and vision is clearly understood when management sets it at the start of the financial year, and then it is used by the employees within the organization to essentially meet those objectives. Now, in terms of the assignment brief, this is basically the assessment grid that we look at here, which you're seeing on the the unit spec. And what I would want to do is basically show you the assignment brief. So this particular assessment grid that we see, which basically is a combination of learning outcomes and, LOs, as we call it here, and then ACs, which is basically assessment criteria. This part gets converted into what are called tasks and activities in an assignment brief. So if I shift you over to the assignment brief, what I would want you to understand is that assignment brief is no different to what we have studied in terms of the assessment criteria, but it basically has 2 main differences when we look at the assignment brief as a whole. The first difference tends to be that the assignment brief has a bit of a scenario, because if I'm going to ask you to undertake some tasks or do some tasks for the purposes of writing an assignment, they could be asked of you to be done in different formats. It could be a case study, it could be an essay or a report, and it could be, a presentation in some cases. So there are different forms in which the awarding organization would ask, your evidence to be compiled. So first things first, what they do is basically when they look at compiling, asking you to compile a report or the evidence for the assignment, what they would ask you to do essentially would be to basically read a scenario, which is to give you a bit of a background that this is what is required, this is what you need to assume. And then basis that assumption, what they're going to do is ask you to complete certain tasks. And these tasks are going to be tasks which are going to be compiled as evidence. And that would be in the form of a Word document, a PowerPoint presentation, maybe sometimes a flow chart, a mind map, an information leaflet, or various different types of outputs, which could be defined as tables, and things like that. So what we want to be able to do is basically understand what is the assignment brief, how we need to go about compiling the assignment, the evidence for the assignment, and then make sure that we are basically compiling the evidence in a way which is going to allow us to essentially achieve the unit in the first instant. Now, this unit obviously has 4 tasks because there are 4 learning outcomes, as you know, in the unit. So each task will have a particular each learning outcome will have a particular task, and that task will end up covering, individual assessment criteria. So if I look at making a quick start, now, one of the other things which I would ask you to do is read the assignment brief and the unit spec before you start doing the assignment. The reason is there are 3-4 things that we need to pick out from the assignment brief and the unit spec. Now, I would want to show, say, a full screen. And the reason I would want to do that is primarily to ensure that you have a good understanding in terms of how I would, if I was in your shoes, essentially end up doing the, assignment. So if I now show you, say, for example, the full screen, which I would want to, because this is how I would go about doing the assignment. So if I look at my full screen, what I would do is basically, you see 3 things on it now. One is the unit specification, which is this one on the left. Then you have the assignment brief, which is what we are going to discuss. And then both these I have converted into a PowerPoint presentation, because what I want to do is essentially discuss with you in terms of how this will be essentially done. And that is the reason why, the use of the PowerPoint presentation. Along with that, what I'm going to do is open up a fresh document, which is basically going to look at how do we go about, looking at very minor details when we start, writing the assignment. Now, the reason I have 3 things which we need to pick out from this. One is you will need the unit specification while doing the assignment, because what you need to write in the task essentially comes from the indicative content. So this can be a cue or a pointer for you to basically look at what has to be covered in individual tasks that are given in the assignment brief. So that is where the unit specification would be required, because it gives you an idea of the indicative content that you have in the unit. And this one document is essential. You can use my PowerPoint presentations, but obviously you'll need to open 4 of them. But the idea is if you have this document open with you, then obviously it makes it easier for you to understand, okay, if the task is asking me to do, say, analyze different resource requirements in 3 businesses, then what are the main requirements that I need to analyze? Then if I scroll down, what I would basically see is resource requirement that I need to analyze could be within 3 businesses, like raw material, equipment, human resources, technology, facilities, time and transport. These are giving you some hints to say, this is what needs to be actually spoken about or written about, essentially not spoken, written about in the evidence for the assignment. So the unit specification is going to be important. The second reason that we look at, which is of importance here, is the assignment brief. The reason I say this is because in the assignment brief, if, for example, we do not have work experience and we do not know or have a prior work experience of working within an organization, then the assignment brief comes to our rescue, because it gives you a very clear idea in terms of what you need to assume to be able to start writing the assignment. Now, sometimes you write assignments or you do a creation of evidence for, by writing a report, and they tend to be descriptive, because what has happened in those reports is that you have not actually shown the application by taking up an example of, essentially, an organization. And this means that what you are going to be doing is talking about the subject descriptively, theoretically only, but you're not going to be able to show the application. So the assignment brief becomes important because it allows you to stitch in the example which has been given in the scenario. So here in this case, it says you're employed as a researcher for Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the UK. So you know that you're employed, you know that you are working as a researcher, and your organization in which you're working is the DOE, which is DIFRA. In the UK, it is called DEFRA, DEFRA. And that organization, DEFRA, you work for, and you work as a researcher. So it gives you a job, it gives you a title, it gives you an organization to stitch into the context of, your report. And that is why, the assignment brief becomes important. Now, before you do the task, it's like a simple instruction. Sometimes you give an instruction to your child to say, can you do this? You might have your child coming back and telling you that, okay, why do I need to do this? So you need to give them a context to say, okay, if you do this, this is what you will get. Similarly, in the assignment, the scenario is basically given to give you a context to start the task, or before you do the task, so you have a bit of an understanding that this is what I'm expected to do, and this is what I would be using as an example in some of my tasks to explain what I'm doing. Now, if I go further in the assignment brief, there are key points that I need to look at. One point in that is basically looking at spotting what are called command verbs. Now, these are words which basically give you enough idea, very clear idea in terms of how much is too much to write and how much is too less to write. So if you try and complete a particular task and you don't know the meaning of the command verb, what it is asking you to do, then in this case, sometimes what will happen is that when you write your assignment, you're going to be writing the assignment, which is, or writing the evidence essentially in the assignment, which is going to be either too scant or basically too much of too much, because it is not required in those tasks to explain, in that detail. So there will be some indication that I will give you when I look at the presentation to tell you command verbs, and these command verbs are words which basically define what is required to be done in the task. And they have a very specific meaning. So when I say, and I'm bolding some of them just to give you an idea, and they would essentially be useful because at the end of the day, what you're going to do is use these to, write your evidence accordingly. Now, in any given unit, you normally would have not more than 15 to 16 command verbs. They would start with explain, describe, and they would go into things like analyze, assess, compare, contrast, evaluate. They tend to be the most popular ones. And if you know the meanings of these command verbs, then it helps you essentially, do your assignment in the first instant. And, you're able to pretty much get it straight off. There is no, going back and forth with the tutor, and that will basically mean that you get the assignment right the first time. Now, apart from this, what I would want to basically mention at this stage would be in the assignment brief, some of you can also look into this particular bit, which is primarily looking at, the bits on, I would say, what would the assessor, when I get your assignment, what I would be looking at in your report. So this is a bit of an insight or a peep into an assessor's mind to see what the assessor is going to be looking at as evidence, because this is what the awarding organization here, or AO in short, actually gives some guidelines. And these guidelines can be used as a bit of a cheat sheet by learners when they are writing the assignment. Now, ideally, I should not include this in the assignment brief, but generally speaking, if it is going to help the learners write a perfect assignment or a good assignment to be able to pass and achieve it first time, then this is the objective of having them included. So I would also go through, the guidelines for assessors, wherein if you see it says task 1, what I'm going to be looking at when you submit your report, it is going to cover 1.1 and 1.2. It says in this section, a written report by the learner must include a thorough analysis of resource requirements related to business in different sectors of economy. That means it is going to be important when I look at your assignment that you need to pick out 3 different businesses in 3 different sectors of economy. So, for example, we could look at the NHS, a care home, and we could look at a small SME business, and they are going to be in 3 different sectors: primary, secondary, and tertiary. So primary sector being somebody who's producing the goods from raw material extracted from the earth. Secondary meaning they were further finishing those goods and then selling the goods and services onto end customers, and that would be tertiary sector. And they would be then the 3 different examples that you pick out. Now, if you pick out the bank, if you pick out, say, for example, a bank, and you pick out another bank, and you pick out, say, for example, a services business, that means you're not covering 3 sectors unless the organizations that you have chosen can be clearly demonstrated that they work across sectors. So if I pick up a car manufacturing company, they would be in the secondary sector. They would also be in the tertiary sector. If I pick out NHS for the purposes of discussion, they would be in the secondary sector or the tertiary sector, mostly in the tertiary sector. If I pick out an SME, which is producing engineering company or a production company, they might be in the primary sector. They might also be finishing the goods and providing it to other businesses, which are their customers, and they would fall into what is called the secondary sector. So essentially here, the outline would require these 3 different organizations that you select. And again, it says learners should use examples to demonstrate their understanding. So you can't do it descriptively to say, I'm looking at an organization in primary, secondary, and tertiary sector. You draw a table up, and then you do not mention any companies or organizations in terms of how these resources requirements that you've taken are related to them. So when I say resources requirement in these 3 different types of sectors, could be things like raw material, equipment, technology, facilities, human resources, time, and transport. So this part of the assignment brief, second point, becomes useful for you to be able to understand what evidence would be required in order to successfully pass the unit. And that is where this would be important. Now, last but not the least, when we look at the assignment brief, as you would see sometimes in the assignment brief towards this end here, as you can see, ATHE has also given example businesses. So what they've clearly specified is the first business would need to be, or one of the businesses would in the primary sector could be an agriculture business. Second business that you're going to consider is going to be an engineering business. And the third business that you're going to consider is going to be a call center. Now, in some cases, it can also say that you are able to pick your own businesses, and this then could be used, primarily, from a point of view of using these as examples to do the task. Now, if you are doing the tasks wherein you're using your own company and organization, then the idea here would be to basically mention a brief introduction at the start of the assignment in 20 to 30 words to say that I'm looking at taking these 3 organizations for the purposes of doing my assignment. Now, as you can see, they've given a bit of a case study, which is going to be covered in task 4. And in this task 4, it says basically you would need to, write a report. And this report will essentially, come from the case study, which the organization, which the awarding body has provided. So annexure 2 here would be to look at reading this particular case study. And then we'd be looking at answering, task 4, which is predominantly given for the purposes of coverage, for the assignment. So as you can see in this assignment brief, the awarding organization has given quite a lot in terms of data, and you would not need to look out for, say, a company or data outside in order to basically, compile the evidence for the assignment. Now, what I would want to do at this stage is move you towards a PowerPoint presentation, and that would be essentially looking at, discussing the assignment in a bit more detail. Any questions on this so far? Any questions at your end, anybody?
What assignment is this again? I just joined in late.
Okay, this is resource management.
Okay, and are we starting this assignment from today?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, no worries. Now, what we would do is also at some stage look at how do we go about, writing an assignment. And for those of you who are doing the first session with me, and this is maybe the first unit that you're going to start, what I would suggest is the guidance that I would want to give is quite detailed, because it will hopefully help set a bit of a foundation when you start doing other units with me over a point in time under this particular course. So the first thing that we look at in the assignment is, if I, switch you over to a Word document just for the purposes of showing how you would compile an assignment, and just look at focusing on this page. Now, there are some tips that I would give you. The first tip is make sure that you write your name on the footer or the header of your assignment, so that it can clearly be identified that this is the person who's essentially submitting the assignment. Start with a headline, which is basically saying the unit name. If there is a unit number and a unit code, mention that, and then leave the first page, essentially blank. Because what I will do at a later stage here would be to compile a table of contents. So here in this case, what I would do is basically press enter a couple of times and then go into insert. And then using insert, what I'm going to do is insert a page number as well, so that the assignment is going to be multiple pages. I want to make sure that the assignment is numbered. And then what I would also do at the start of the assignment is basically look at choosing font size 12 and then line spacing 1.5. We want the spacing when I write something as text, I want that to be clearly legible, and obviously it should be structured and professionally presented. So these are basic things that I would do. Is font size, I would choose font Arial or Calibri, whichever one you prefer, either Arial or Calibri. I would choose the font size to be 12. And then I would look at basically line spacing 1.5, and then start with by writing my name in the footer or header, inserting page numbers, and write the name of the unit. Now, in the first page, as I mentioned, I'll leave it blank. I'll go to pages and do a page break, and I would start with the second page. Now, here is where what I want to do is basically copy the task which has been given in the assignment brief. So I'm going to copy the task as it is from the Word document assignment which is given. And this particular assignment would help me look at, just preparing a working document of how my assignment would look like towards once I've fully completed it. So task 1 basically has two tasks which I need to do. One is task 1.1 and 1.2. So here I have essentially in the presentation already gone ahead and taken 3 different organizations on which I will be comparing, the various resources that have been asked for. So what I would do is essentially, if I show you this bit where I've created a table, what I would want to do is change the layout of this page so that the table can actually fit in. So I'll go to the orientation, change it to landscape. And as you can see, this basically bit makes the, table much more presentable. Now, obviously, because I've pulled it out from a presentation right now, which I'll show you, the font size seems to be slightly larger on PowerPoint. So what I'm going to do is bring it down to 12, and that would essentially see the, font matching and the evidence being nicely presented as far as the task 1 is concerned. Now, in this case, what I would also do is, because I need to do a bit of write-up in terms of after the table, I have created some bullet points, and what I would do is again mention those bullet points in order to look at completing this particular part of the task. Now, when I go to the next page, I go to layout, page break, next page, and change the orientation back to portrait. So what will happen is, as you can see, my assignment would essentially, be in a format which I want it to be presented, nicely. So there will be a combination of things that I can do. and that is what I am looking at doing. So if you see, the tasks with the table become landscape, and the other part of the assignment still continues to be remaining portrait. This is the way I would look at formatting the document as I go along and compile the evidence. Now, when I look at task 2, what I would do is again copy the task 2 from the assignment brief as it is. And I know that these are different assessment criteria that I would be looking at. And if I just, put this up here as well, along with that. So as you can see, there are 4 bullet points. 4 bullet points. Each of these bullet points corresponds to this particular task. So I can rename them as 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4. These are the assessment criteria which are essentially required to be answered as tasks. So what I will do is create some spaces between them, because obviously I will be writing some evidence. I'll be doing my research on the internet, the books, the presentation. And then what I would want to do at the end of the day is basically look at, writing the evidence, as tasks or as activities which have been defined here in this document. Now, I can go on and obviously complete, writing the other parts of the tasks just very briefly and very quickly. And that would essentially be, so if I insert a page break here, I want to go to the next page, look at the next task. And again, this is task 4. I'm going to start on a new page and I'm going to put this here. Now, as you can see, the assessment criteria are clearly indicated here. So what I would do is, they are for the purposes of tutors. What I'm going to do is basically just rearrange some of these assessment criteria by naming them like this. And that would essentially be, looking at, putting it into a bit of context. Now, if I just quickly format that, then I will go into one last bit, which I want to explain on this document. And the same case, which I'll do is basically for these. So as you remember, some of you, this particular unit, almost apart from learning outcome 1, all the other learning outcomes 2, 3, and 4 have 4 assessment criteria in the assignment. So that is why you see that there are 4 tasks which are generally given. And what we need to be able to do is, when we compile and do the assignment and the tasks, what we are going to be looking at doing is primarily ensuring that they are done, as per what has been provided, on the assignment brief. Now, last but not the least, what I want to show you how to draw up a table of contents. So here, if you see, this is task 1. What I will do is go into home and choose heading 1, right? And then what I would do is basically this part of the task is essentially 1.1. So what I'm going to do is put an enter here. And then this part of the task is 1.2. But both of them are being done together. So what I will do is basically select this, and this will become heading 2. I'll put 1.1 in front of it, and this will become heading 2 again. This is 1.2 in front of it. And then go on to this task again. This is heading 1, and these are going to be subheadings. Now, sometimes when you do this formatting, as you can see, the subheadings are disappearing. The numbering that we have done is disappearing, and they can be put manually. But because we know that they've been done separately, as an assessor, I would be able to clearly, understand that there are these 4 broad, tasks that you have looked at completing in each of 4 activities that you've looked at completing in each of the tasks which have been given. And I'll be looking at referring to the assignment brief in any case. So rather than doing it individually, let me just do it together. And then towards the end, what I would also do is insert another page. And here is where I'm going to compile my references or bibliography. Sources from which I have gleaned the data, collected the data, paraphrased it, written in my own words. Those are the bits that I would look at putting it in the last page as bibliography or references. Now, this bit, which I've done, what I'm going to do now is basically create a table of content. So what I do is basically go into references and look at table of content. And when I click on this, it will automatically nicely bring this across as what is called a summary of what tasks I've attempted in the assignment brief. And this is the level of output of the assignment I would expect when you submit, for the purposes of assessment. Now, we will go into the nitty-gritty of it in terms of discussion of some of the tasks that are to be done in the assignment. But this is to show you how the structuring of the document has to be done in order to ensure that you are, presenting something which is, professionally presented. It is structured. There is spell checking and grammar which can be done. So, for example, if I click on the editor here, and what I look at is before I submit my assignment, I would like to proofread my work, and that proofreading of work would mean that I'm checking the spellings, my grammar, my punctuation, to ensure that at level 4, when you're doing, which is like the first year of uni, you're doing and submitting an assignment which is meeting and is a professionally formatted, perfect document that you submit for the purposes of evaluation. So when I click on grammar, it'll show me where the spaces are there or where, punctuation and, is not being applied. And we can quickly correct that by using the software. And that allows me to now submit something which is perfectly proofread, checked, and grammatically and spelling wise a perfect document that I would like to submit for the purposes of evaluation. Now, one last thing, what I would do in this document would be to primarily save it at every step of the way. And I'm going to save this document at my end. Reason, because I will provide this as a sample to you towards the end of the session so that you can use this as a document for your reference going forward, and then provide something which is meeting or very closely resembling this particular sample that I've shown. Now with this, what we will do is we'll switch over to the PowerPoint presentation to discuss the assignment brief in a bit more detail. Any questions on what I've shown so far or what I've explained so far? Any questions? Okay, good. So what I will do is you can ask me questions through the chat route as well, not a problem. Now, what I've done is using the unit spec and the assignment brief, I've converted this into a PowerPoint presentation, which makes it a bit easier for us to discuss what is required to be done and accomplished by submitting, the assignment for this unit. Now, some of the bits I've already discussed, so I'll just quickly go through them. I've asked you and shown you how to go about structuring and formatting your document, the assignment document. And here, if you're going to be using a different organization than the one which has been given in the assignment brief, then the idea would be to try and do a brief introduction to explain the one or two points that you are going to follow through in the assignment brief. Table of contents I've shown you. I've told you how to write the task clearly, font size, line spacing, page numbering, and obviously towards the end, a bit of conclusion and references and bibliography. One of the other things which I would suggest that you need to do is there is an assignment declaration that you need to get access to, and this can also be done online on the website. But generally, you would see in Moodle, there is an assignment declaration which you need to fill in. And this declaration basically, you have to put your name here, your student registration number, your course name, and the assignment number, and then check all these boxes. Basically, when you're checking off all these boxes, it basically says that you are aware of plagiarism, you are making sure that you are referencing your work, you've cited sources, and you've created a bibliography or a reference list to ensure that the work that is being presented is not cut, copies, and pasted, and you are basically giving due credit to authors, publishers, scientists, psychologists, or people who have actually written the work, and you're using them if you use that in your own work, you're Harvard referencing it, which is what is required as a guideline when you do the assignment. And towards the end, what you do is you sign it off, and you would need to submit this declaration along with your assignment document. Now, some other useful tips, which I've just gone through, but I'll very briefly mention them and recap them here again. First is, as I mentioned, read the assignment brief carefully, and also focus on details which are given in the assignment. So it should not be a case of just looking at the assignment and jumping onto it. You should go through the assignment brief once or twice, make some notes on it, and required, understand what are the command verbs. And these command verbs are important because they will allow you to understand how much to write for each task, and give you a bit of a steer in that direction to say that this is what is required to be done to be able to successfully complete and achieve that task. Now, I have listed down a few command verbs that you will generally get to see when you do the assignment. There are going to be a combination of explain, define, describe. They tend to be pass order command verbs, wherein you're basically theoretically covering the definition, the meaning, and the context of what is being asked, and you're briefly describing it in about 70 to 100 words, and they would be that particular part of the task. There are higher order command verbs, which will be merit command verbs. They typically tend to be assess, examine, clarify, or analyze. Here, in order to pass the task, what you also have to do is give arguments or positives and negatives or advantages and disadvantages of what is being asked. And then towards the end, what you need to be able to do is make a conclusion. And when I say conclusion, you're giving enough supportive evidence to say why you're going with the conclusion. The last type of command verbs tend to be distinction command verbs in some cases, and they tend to be generally compare, contrast, critically evaluate, critically analyze, and they are requiring a bit more evidence in terms of writing. So apart from maybe discussing and discussing the topic, for example, if I talk about motivational theories and it says compare and contrast two, or compare and contrast different motivational theories. Now, I can't do comparison with just one theory of Maslow's, theory of hierarchy or theory X and Y. Comparison means you need to take at least two. When we talk about contrast, again, you're trying to compare one situation with the other. So you have to have two minimum to be able to compare. It can be more. And in some cases, depending on if you are being asked to compare and contrast the motivational theories, then you would need to take 2 or 3 or 4 theories and then basically explain them theoretically, what the theory essentially are, maybe use a picture diagram, then at some stage talk about the positives, pros and cons of this theory, or advantages and disadvantages of this theory. And then comparing and contrasting would mean you're comparing one theory with the other and saying why this is now more acceptable or more widely used in the context of human resources. And there is where you are giving reasonings for it by taking up an example of an organization and saying, this is how this theory is used by HR managers, or they put this into practice in the company by introducing this. And that is an example. And that is where the write-up tends to be slightly higher in terms of words. And because this is a higher order distinction command verb. Now, all assignments that you're going to do are going to be based on Harvard referencing. Harvard referencing is also called the author date style referencing method. The reason why it is that way is because you would generally see when you write references or mention the references for author, you'll write the last name of the author, followed by the year in which, the author had introduced that subject topic or, the work which has been, published. And that if you have more than 2 authors, you'll obviously use 2 last names separated by a comma and a year. And if it is more than 3, then normally you write et al, which is Johnson et al, ETAL. That means Johnson and team, comma 2011. And they have been responsible for creating or whatever you're using in the assignment, and you're referencing it by using Harvard referencing. So there is a video and a presentation that is also there on our site on Moodle as well. And I would suggest if those of you who are new to Harvard referencing should actually go through that presentation and also look at that video to which gives you a good understanding of why referencing is to be done, how referencing is to be done, and why it needs to be followed in order to minimize similarity and plagiarism. Now, one last thing which I would mention, there are no word limits in the assignment, simply because, awarding organization does not provide any word limit. But generally speaking, if you're looking at achieving a pass, normally I don't see anybody passing the assignment if I don't see about 3,000 to about 4,000 words being written. If you're looking at aiming at merit, generally because of the nature of the tasks, it can go up to between 4,500 to 5,000 words. And if you're doing distinction, then it tends to be, anywhere between 5,000 to, I would say, 5,500 words. But if you're staring more than this particular limit, I would suggest that you are basically either writing too much, or you're writing, you're maybe steering away from the point in terms of what the task is asking you to do. So these are just example word limits that you can follow for the purposes of, doing the assignment. Now, one other thing which I would primarily mention, that when you do your assignment, it is important for universities, when you sometimes go into doing top-up courses after completing level 4 and 5, you generally see universities put a word limit, and they normally look at penalizing you if you exceed that word limit. And yet that is why sometimes, in my presentations and my discussions, I would say that if you're looking at completing an assignment, it should allow you to write academically with referencing, building arguments, understanding the command verbs, and you should be able to accomplish the assignment in about 3,500 plus minus 10% in terms of word limit. So 3,500, if it's that 350 word, would mean 3,850, and less than normally on a subtractant side, it'll become 3,150. But generally speaking, you should keep that as a guidance, and then try and see if you are able to do the work and submit the work in that particular word limit. Now, headings and proper headings, I've mentioned already. This is a part of structuring your assignment, and you need to be aware that the college policy is 20% plagiarism, up to 20%. So we obviously scan your work through Turnitin and ensure that if anything is going over that limit, you'll get a copy of the report back to show you where the work has been copied, and then you have to look at paraphrasing and rewriting that bit of paragraphs in order to reduce the work which is coming up as similarity. There is this video of Harvard referencing, which is on YouTube on our channel. And this is a 5-minute video, which will give you a very good idea in terms of what is Harvard referencing, how do you do referencing, why is it required, why is it a mandatory requirement, and then various ways through which you can use referencing. I wouldn't go into this at this moment, but I would suggest that for those of you who are doing this, who are going to be writing the first assignment, it is a good start to start building up this skill, because most courses will require Harvard referencing to be done. One last bit of guidance before we go into the actual detailing of the assignment. Very briefly, we are looking at an assessment and feedback process. There is no pass and fail. Everybody is going to pass. There is no way that you are going to not cover or not complete this unit. If it requires me to give you feedback 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, does not matter. But generally speaking, the feedback process is designed in a way wherein when you submit your work, if we will go through the assessment criteria, see you're meeting the requirement, the evidence is in line with what has been asked for. But if we do feel in places either the work is brief, is not meeting the criteria, or is going away from what has been asked for, then in those cases, what we will do is give you some feedback, which will be annotated comments on your Word document. And that these comments would be giving you a direct steer in terms of what is required to be done to be able to achieve that unit. So the feedback and the process works to help you achieve the unit, to help you achieve a grade if you're aiming to achieve one, and the feedback is commensurate, or is going to be commensurate to what your aim and objective is of completing and achieving this unit. The feedback process generally can take 4 to 5 working days, but sometimes when we have lots and lots of assessments to do, it can also be up to 2 weeks maximum, but nothing beyond that. Now, if you are required to rework on the assignment, then you're not going to be reworking on the full assignment. There will be some bits and pieces in the task that you're adding to or changing depending on the feedback from me as a tutor for this unit. Then in those cases, what I would expect you to do is basically use the same assignment document which I've sent back with feedback. And when you start adding comments, when you start adding data or information next to those comments in the assignment, then the idea would be to try and highlight them as yellow, which makes it easier for me to spot the second time round when I'm assessing your work. And I can quickly turn it around to say, yes, this was the comment I had given, and this is the additional bit that you've added. Now it meets the criteria, and then the unit then is achieved. So highlighting the work which has been added becomes important, because it helps us to turn it around much faster, simply because I can clearly see what comment was given and how you have added more text or material to it or evidence to it to be able to pass the task and then overall assignment. Is that okay so far? Any questions on this? Any questions so far? Okay, now going to the assignment brief. This is the scenario which has been given, and what I've done is obviously looked at copying that bit, from the assignment brief to discuss the scenario. In task 1, we are asked to do 2 things. We have to take 3 businesses and then obviously look at discussing the resource requirements. This can be done using a table, which is what I've done, and then also mentioned a brief commentary to explain the table. So this is how I've taken 3 businesses. I've taken one as NHS, one as a care home, and one as a small, SME business, which is into production and engineering, a tech company. And what I've done is I've used the various types of resources given in the indicative content: human resources, capital, technology, physical resources, and equipment, to discuss this particular task. And then I've given a bit of a commentary to say what these businesses and organizations with working within various sectors would be looking at, looking at resource requirements from that point of view. And that commentary essentially helps me complete task 1.1. Now, in task 2, there are 4 assessment criteria that we need to cover. So I'm going to follow through on the same businesses or the organizations that I've taken: the NHS, the care home, and that small tech SME business. And I'm going to address each of the assessment criteria individually. So here, because we are going to write them using a Word report or Word document and as a report. So what I've done is I've taken the first task, which is evaluation of how physical resources are monitored and managed. And what I've done is I've explained that particular task by creating a bit of a write-up. So here, as you can see, I've spoken about the NHS, I've spoken about the care home, and then I've spoken about the SME business, and then I've mentioned in my own words what are the various ways that you would generally look at how resources are managed and monitored within the organization. So here I've given an example of within the NHS as a healthcare provider, things like there are lots of equipments and materials which are used in providing care to the patients. In the care homes, obviously, I've looked at, again, various types of resources which the care homes have, things like beds, foods, rooms, entertainment rooms, furniture, administrative, equipments, things like, equipments like CCTV, and they are generally required, to be used by various members of staff to monitor patient movements and, obviously patient conditions. And that is where these resources have to be managed and monitored. And that is what I've explained in this particular task. Similarly, we can go into individual assessment criteria, things like talking about, analysis of, evaluation of impact of resource wastage and assessment of high costs which are related to technological failures. Given an example here, if I am talking about the NHS, it could be that, a couple of years back when we saw hacking happening into the NHS, about 22,000 operations were cancelled in one of the trusts wherein the hacking attack happened, and that technological failure in terms of security breach meant that patients did not have the intended operations on that day, and that created a bit of a backlog with the hospitals in that area, and obviously to maybe loss of life in some cases, and that is why it was termed as a high profile technological failure. So cyber security attacks happening on networks essentially could be treated as one of the areas that you could discuss as costs which can be incurred by these costs could be patients could have sued the NHS simply because it was a critical operation which did not happen, if the patient ended up losing life a couple of days down the line, or if additional costs were taken because the operations were postponed. That means there were additional costs for patients staying in the hospital. The beds could not have been freed up for others waiting in the queue, and that has a knock-on effect on how these failures can affect the treatments which patients are being given within the NHS because of technological failures. So if you have an X-ray machine, simple example, and you have a number of appointments on that day, and the X-ray machine fails after doing 1 or 2 X-rays in the morning, then there's a cost that you would have to bear, in the sense that time, effort, and money. One of the staff members will need to cancel all the appointments, call all the customers. Some of the customers would have already come to the hospital, would have queued up. That would mean, their waste of time, and then rescheduling of those appointments again. And all this takes up time in terms of resources. And that time, when equated to being spent on redoing some of these activities, which would have been possible if the machine had not failed, then can be related to costs and money. And that is why these are, technological failures. So you could take up examples by researching some of these tasks and then include them in your written work for the purposes of completing, these tasks as given in the assignment brief. Similarly, we go to task 3, and again, there are 4 assessment criteria. Here, it is basically clearly saying that you're referring to the profile businesses or similar organizations. That means I am going to mention that if I've taken up these 3 organizations, I will follow through them throughout the assignment to do all the tasks. So I don't need to look at newer examples. So in this case, looking at the examples I've taken, the NHS, the care home business, and the tech SME company, I'm going to then still go ahead and answer some of these tasks which are going to correspond to these criteria: 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4. Now, one of the things that you look at, it talks about analysis of motivation theories, how they can be applied to the place of work. So what I've done is, in individual slides, I've just done a bit of my own research. And here, what I've said is, these are the 4 or 5 theories that we need to look at in terms of analysis. So what I've done is I've summarized each of these theories. If I have to do it in the assignment, what I'm also going to do is include a picture or a diagram of my Maslow's hierarchy of need, the pyramid that we know, the Herzberg's 2-factor theory, and then some of the other theories, expectancy theory, equity theory, and goal setting theory. And there are some diagrams that I can use which basically help me reduce my write-up. Because the diagram of the picture would help me explain the theory and the main aspects of the theory. And then I can write explanations to discuss how these theories can be applied in motivating people within the workplace. And this is how I would be looking at doing this task. Similarly, the next assessment criteria, performance appraisal. Similarly, the next assessment criteria, and that would mean I can complete task 3. Now, the task 4 is to be done as a case study, because here they have given us a case study in Appendix 2. And if I don't want to bring in the case study by copying and pasting here into the assignment, but there is a case study which has been given primarily, and I will put this as, so a case study of Medicare, International Medicare. It goes on into 2-3 pages. So I put some dots here. And then using this case study, what we have to do is basically do these 4 tasks. So it says, monitor the use of physical resources against performance measures and procedures. So here, it will be important for you to refer back to my Learning Outcome 4 presentation. And that would give you guidance in terms of how do we look at monitoring the performance of human resources and physical resources. Now, because it is asking for physical resources, what we need to do is, sometimes when you look at equipment, if these are not maintained or there is no annual maintenance carried out, servicing carried out for this equipment can break down. So the monitoring of the use of physical equipment is maintained in certain circumstances because they are mission critical or they are important for the purposes of running certain activities within the organization. And that is where regular checks or health checks are essentially done in order to ensure that there is no wear and tear. If there is wear and tear, then things and parts in terms of servicing and parts replacements are done so that the equipment continues to work and they are then able to produce the output required. Simple example here, because they've talked about the 3 businesses. If I look at giving an example of the X-ray machine, which I've mentioned yesterday, right now, if yesterday there were a couple of scans done and today there are a couple of scans done and every day there are scans happening, and there is a particular set pattern in which that machine needs to be serviced every so many scans, after so many scans, if that has not been done, then it can lead to a breakdown, and that then affects the performance of the machine and the department as a whole. So in those cases, you would be looking at, talking about why physical resources require regular servicing, and obviously monitoring is required, and they would be done through various things like service contracts, regular checks across the machine, or replacement of parts. And this is an example that you can take up while particularly doing this task. Then we look at analyzing data performance on employees. There is, in the assignment brief, what you will see is basically the performance of the staff is given. If you see, this is the performance of the task which has been given. And as you can see, this table would be required to be utilized to discuss this particular point. So for task 4, in short, what I would suggest is that I would expect you to go through the case study and then understand the case study, and then go about doing the task in a bit, as per the case study which has been provided, in order to complete, the 4 assessment criteria given in task 4. Now, once this has been done and you create your working document, what I would suggest is you need to submit your assignment to learner work. And what I would then do is, once I get your assignment, you get an acknowledgement receipt that your work has been submitted. And then at the end of it, what will happen is I will mark your assignment. And then once I mark your assignment, what I would then do is give you feedback to say, this is fine, this is okay, this is achieved. And in places, if I do feel that the work is not meeting the criteria, I'll give you direct guidance to say, this is what you need to do to be able to achieve the unit. And then if you have any queries related to, the work itself or the assignment, you can always write into me at Raman@UK Versity, and I would be able to get back to you with additional information that would help, solve or give you more information on your query. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far today? So what I will do towards the end of this session is I'm going to upload a copy of this presentation to Moodle, which is where, and let me just quickly show you where this will be on Moodle. And when I look at uploading this particular copy on Moodle, what I will also be looking at doing is uploading the sample Word document, which is what I have created just by doing 1 or 2 tasks, as just to give you a bit of an example in terms of how you would go about, how you would go about essentially, basically submitting the assignment and doing it. So let me just show you one other thing while I'm on it. So this is the link where you can also electronically fill up the assignment declaration. Let me just put it here. So you have it, and then let me just also switch over to showing you Moodle. So when you go onto the website, this is the link where I've put that link in, wherein you can actually choose your course. So in your case, it is the Level 4 Diploma in Management of Health and Social Care. You can click all these units in one go and submit the declarations once and for all the units that you're going to study. And for those of you who are doing business, would obviously choose the business and management course and obviously click the units, and that would electronically take in all the declarations for all the units required. Now, when you're up on Moodle, just to show you where I'm going to upload the assignment discussion session. So if you go into your course and choose Level 4 Diploma in Health and Social Care Management, and then go into Resource Management, which is the unit which is currently highlighted in a yellow colored outline box, because that's the unit which is currently being delivered, which is here. And then what I would do is basically upload this particular assignment and the presentation. Now, what you will also see just before the close of play today would be that I would also be uploading the books on this particular unit that you need to have, or at least could refer to if you're looking at, obviously doing your own research. So all the books, related journals, and, things which are required for you to be able to successfully complete and achieve this unit would be made available here. So let me just upload them quickly right now. Oh, there we go. So here is the assignment brief that we've discussed. That's the bit which is here. So LO1, LO2, LO3, and LO4. And if I put across the assignment discussion session that we've done today. So that is the presentation for the assignment discussion session. And then the sample assignment Word document, which I created, which is here. There are certain bits which I want to primarily also provide. And they are going to be looking at, these are handouts which would be relevant for relevant, learning outcomes. They are neatly and nicely labeled. So for certain, cases, when you look at studying certain learning outcomes, you would see that there are case studies and there are articles and there are journals that I've included primarily to ensure that you have enough reading material, for each of the learning outcomes in terms of, understanding the concepts. So when we talk about management performance techniques, there are these techniques like balanced scorecard, management by objective, and there is, certain, when we look at monitoring and management through performance, there are reward fact sheets. So I will open some of these up right now and then obviously show you, if you give me 1 second. So employee turnover and assessment sheet, value creation. Okay. Label them accordingly so that it's easier for you to essentially look at some of these learning outcomes and what requires to be studied. So that would primarily, complete pretty much, the requirements for this particular unit. And then I will add another one, which is important. And that is for this part. Now, if I just show you what I've uploaded, obviously there are some articles, some case studies, and some good, papers which you can read through for understanding, resource. For example, this one is a DEFRA paper published on resource and wage strategy. This is a requirement that you need to probably look at, primarily for your learning outcome 2 and also for your learning outcome 4. Then there are some bits and pieces in terms of value creation, wherein I've explained how resource management can be used to create value within the organization. This is a article published in the Joint Scientific Management Journal, which is a good read, about 10 minutes. Then there are some fact sheets which I've downloaded, and they are relevant for understanding, how do organizations look at retaining their employees. What is employee turnover? How do they look at measuring performance? How do they look at introducing rewards and incentive schemes? And they are going to be useful, for you for the purposes of assignment. Balanced scorecard, which is an important performance evaluation technique. So there's a bit of a handout on this in terms of how balanced scorecard is used as a method, and an example is given, and why it has these 4 strategies of looking at finance, customer, internal processes, and training and development. Then there are other fact sheets that you would see which are important to understand reward mechanisms which are used by organizations to motivate employees. motivational theories. There is a handout that I can put for motivational theories, motivation theories. And this handout that you would see, would summarize all the motivation theories that we need to look at, and we need to have a good understanding on from a point of view of, summarizing them in a bit of detail. And this particular handout is something which I'll also upload. It's something quite important, and I think it'll be useful for you to do the task, which is primarily, learning outcome 3, when it talks about motivational theories. So I have uploaded this here, and this should now help you, basically complete the assignment and the unit successfully. So this is the detail on motivational theories. It's a handout which covers all the major motivational theories that we know of, and it is going to be a good reading handout which you can also read and then use it for the purposes of doing your assignment. So I've uploaded most of the stuff now on Moodle, and this is more or less giving you complete information to be able to start doing your assignment successfully. Any questions at this stage? Eunice, Samira, and Sumit, any questions at this stage? Okay, that's fine. If there are no more questions, then I'll end the session now, and hopefully we'll catch up with you next week when we start a new unit. And this would be primarily, details would be sent across to you by Jill. And until then, if you think of any questions or any queries related to the assignment or resource management as a unit, feel free to drop me an email and I'll come straight back to you. Thank you so much for attending. And